Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Um, this is an edition of our ongoing series, The Future of Entertainment. And today we're going to talk about production during COVID with cinematographer Marcell Rév and editor Julio Perez about their new feature film on Netflix, Malcolm and Marie. We have wanted to do a conversation about production during the pandemic for a long time. So I'm really excited to bring in some guests whose work is now widely available and that hopefully everyone has had a chance to watch. So thank you both for taking the time out to join us today for this.
Thanks for having us.
If anyone out there in the audience wants to write in a question, just put it in the Q&A box and we'll talk for a little bit and then we'll start taking questions from the audience. So Malcolm and Marie, I remember it getting announced as sort of this clandestine secret project that, that Sam Levinson was out making somewhere early in the pandemic. And I feel like that was what was really surprising about it was how kind of quickly it came together. And I'm just seeing the timeline for the production of this film went basically from April to September of last year. So, a lot of productions started to kind of pick back up towards the end of the summer and into the fall. But this was really at the point where many of us were like barricaded in our houses. And I'm very curious to know what those initial conversations were like with Sam about, going back to work, particularly since in this case, and we'll talk about it, you couldn't do it within Los Angeles.
That's correct. Who should?
Well, Marcell, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Julio just based on how you guys fall on my screen.
Yeah. Also, Julio, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's on me. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Also, it's the production to post-production like pipeline, so it's a proper,
right.
It's a proper sequence. It feels comfortable to me. So.
Okay. Okay. So the lockdown started somewhere like mid-March, right? If I'm correct, and that's when we were like really we were prepping season 2 of Euphoria at the time, just like we're doing it right now, a year later. And so we got shut down like right before we were about to start a shoot, and everyone was like, scared at first, but we were also cranked up to get into to work. We were supposed to work for the whole year, and I think after a couple of weeks of quarantine, Sam started to figure out the way we can do something while we have to wait to get back to Euphoria, and he came up with this movie, I think with Zendaya, with Z, and he wrote the script fairly quickly, I guess, like in a couple of weeks, and we the next thing I knew was we were scouting for a house, I think mid-May, I would say, or maybe or late May. I'm not sure about those times, but somewhere there. And we quarantined to make this movie in early mid-June, I think, and we shot it in mid-June. And I think by the end of June we had the stuff in the box, and Julio started to work on it.
I guess the biggest question though is the decision to say yes, like the decision that this was possible. What did you have to do to convince yourself and potentially the people in the camera department that this was something you could pull off?
Oh yeah, I think that was I think one part was that we were really ready to shoot, and that means a certain kind of energy that you're like you expect to go into something like a big job, and that energy just stays with you. And and we also, I think Sam felt pretty responsible for these people who left without work because of the pandemic. So I think the will was there to create something and to give an opportunity to ourselves and to our crew to also not only just to create something, but also to make a living, you know. So that's and also the other part is that you know, there's a certain trust, because we knew these people from either from Euphoria season 1 or from older projects. So there was a certain kind of trust. We knew each other. So going into they knew that we wouldn't invite them to something that's not safe or not fair or not, I don't know. So that was definitely a part of it. And yeah, and just the willingness that everyone wanted to work. And on the logistical side, there were a lot of obstacles, obviously, that are like, it's mostly like the production side of it, like how whether you are allowed to shoot something, whether you can get a permit to shoot on a location, stuff like that. That, I mean, fortunately not me, but the producers had to figure out.
Well, and then you did wind up finding a beautiful house, but that also had the advantage of not requiring a permit to shoot in.
Exactly, that was in Carmel, and at the time, you don't require any permit to shoot on a private location in Carmel, and that wasn't the case, and that's not the case in LA. And at the time, they were not giving out any permits in California, so that was a little way around it. Also, there were a lot of safety, like, I don't know, like health measurements, safety measurements in that we had to. Complete, like, you know, we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. We had to test before we got to quarantine. We had to test at the end of the quarantine. So there were a lot of like things, like production kind of things that that were in place, and had to overcome them.
How did that affect the way that you I guess assembled your team and your department? Because in addition to all of the things that you had to go through, you made the decision to shoot on film, and there's so much to unpack there. I mean, the aesthetic of the film is gorgeous, and you know, a lot of that comes from the fact that it requires very, you know, precise lighting. And you're certainly spending a lot of time on composition. You know, the image of the frame is beautiful. I assumed when I first heard about a project like this that we were talking about something where it was, you know, a little bit more of like Steadicam digital, people sort of like, you know, almost like a not like mumblecore, but you know, of that sort, because of how much simpler the production process might have been. And so I'm curious, like, if you would talk a little bit about the decision to make the film in black and white film, because obviously the quality of it speaks for itself, but the challenges of doing that logistically with however many people you need to bring in to work on lighting and I don't know, focus pulling and camera operating and all of that can't have been an easy challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes down to making decisions, you know, making movies is all about compromises, and it's all about like what compromises you're making and what compromises you're not making. And I think we were open for a lot of compromises, and we thought, okay, but let's stick to a couple of things, like, for example, shooting on film, that we're not compromising in, despite of the pandemic, despite that there is no lab open, despite that Kodak is not functioning as it was before the pandemic and stuff like that. So we were ready to compromise it. You know, Sam wrote this for like one location, 2 actors. So it was designed for the pandemic and for this situation. But we thought aesthetically, it's great to stick to certain things and elevate it to make it a little more cinematic and give something that's unexpected in these times. And I think shooting on film, for example, or shooting black and white was a decision that helped us to create something that's unexpected.
So Julio, I want to bring you into this in terms of the way that the film is shot, because there's a few things that must have been a real sort of shakeup to your process. For one, the film didn't have a script supervisor. So continuity becomes becomes an issue. Also, as I mentioned, the composition is beautiful in the film, and I'm wondering if, by the very nature of how well composed the film is, if the shots were selected in such a way that there was less coverage because you knew exactly what you wanted, or if the stuff that's going to Julio, allowed for sort of a variety of shots. I'm just kind of curious how the actual shot footage then worked out for you, Julio, if this was just sort of a normal, or if there were certain things specific to the way that it was shot that changed the way you had to work.
Yeah. So with the script supervisor situation, I mean, shouts to Harrison, because Harrison Price, a producer, would sort of give us heads up if continuity was more troubled on certain scenes or sequences than others. He'd maybe jot something down on a Word doc and then email us. So that was helpful. That was at least somewhere, but certainly not as good as having a genuine script supervisor, which indispensable part of the team. I'm also always amazed how a script supervisor isn't split into two jobs: listening to the lines versus dealing with continuity. To hold both of those in one head is really impressive. So with shot selection, and clearly they approached it in a way that Sam and Marcell have a defined process that they're comfortable with each other, that is familiar to me as well. Now, certainly it wasn't, the shooting of this was very familiar to me through, like aspects of Euphoria and Assassination Nation, which I did a little work on. So there are things that were very familiar to me, but it was a two-hander. It did have a kind of, let's say, it was a lot of very designed in a way that certain scenes of Euphoria are actually mimic that, or it mimics certain highly designed scenes in Euphoria. But then there's also, Euphoria is so expansive, and so like so many ambitions and resources and things that we can do on that show that weren't happening in a two-hander, like, and during a pandemic. So the scenes that Marcell and Sam might shoot where they're trying to capture some spontaneous spark, which I jokingly will tell Sam. So it's like, oh, you did a little mini doc for that scene. Great. I'm like, I'm gonna have to sift through all that. And so those didn't really exist as much. The mini docs didn't really happen for Malcolm Marie. But what the real challenge that was presented, certainly wasn't composition or lighting and all that, because they have, I can tell through take 1 to take 7 or something like that, the evolution. I can kind of see what Sam is thinking, what Marcell thinking. I'm like, oh, okay, they're going for more of a backlight here, and I might have to ignore that and go with take 4 if the performance is stellar. So the real, for me personally, in my experience, it was less about the black and white versus Technicolor or whatever it is irrelevant to me. Only aesthetically will I respond to. I was like, wow, this is gorgeous, and I was like just stunned at the way that Marcell captured Zendaya and John David Washington. So once I set that aside, I don't care anymore. I'm like, this is gorgeous. All right, moving on. And so in dealing with it, it comes down to a big part of it is how sort of the polyrhythms that go into any given take, in the delivery of lines, in the blocking, how did they achieve it? And then when usually you get down to the last few takes are the most accomplished ones, but then in trying to create a sort of elegant style of editing most of the time, there's a deep concern about picking stretches of time that you have the magnetic quality to the performance, that you are engaged, that it has a certain let's say, almost mystical or chemical sort of alchemical sense to it, that it contains certain properties that are, some of them are just you're able to describe them, and other are ineffable. They're just, it just feels a certain way. Now, for that, and then looking at that take to take to take in anything that I do always, but then adding that sort of personal system and proclivities to 13 to 15 minute takes over and over and over again. It was a particular kind of attention span, and for like one of the just prime just fundamental commodities and first principles of an editor is concentration. The need to be able to concentrate on something, because you're watching a take, you're watching them say it again, you're watching them say it again and again, and then times whatever. And that ability to look at variances and accomplishments and qualities that are higher and lower take to take to take becomes really pretty daunting when it's dialogue, like talking and over 10 to 12 to 15 minutes. So that really kind of brought me a little bit, like I was a little bit in my wheelhouse from early indie shoestring dialogue oriented days, but this was a whole new level as far as just the really long takes and staying continuing to apply my concentration and analytical capacities or incapacities to it. So that I'd say that was probably the biggest thing. Now, it's like, they did a great job, and some it just, pretty uniformly was gorgeous. And then when it wasn't gorgeous, they'd call cut, and that was the 2-minute take that I wouldn't look at again, so yeah.
So Marcel, were you what was the philosophy in terms of the shots that you were going to get to send over to Julio? Was there, I mean, there are a lot of long takes which are particularly effective at, really being in the thick of the emotion with the actors. There's also a lot of things that sort of are a little bit less, what's the right word? Obvious choices that turned out to be really beautiful. For instance, when you've got like the dolly shot outside of the house moving back and forth between the windows. Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy of how you guys were going to shoot? If there was a sort of alternatives, things you wanted to try, or were you really storyboarding anything? Were there things that, you've got a lot of glass in the film. How did you go about determining, where you were going to put the camera?
Yeah, so I think so we spent 14 days or 12 days, or I don't remember exactly, prior to the shooting in quarantine together with the actors and the crew. So we spent those 12 days to figure out what this whole thing is, because since it was such a quick prep and we got to talk about it, but usually we like to talk about it a lot and we like to collect a lot of references and so on. But there was, since it was a so fast moving project, this didn't happen on this one. So we took that time to really figure out how to approach this, and also rehearsing with the actors, which helped a lot. We had a pretty, I would say, a detailed idea of we could block this whole, and then when we arrived on set, it's just never the same. But in this project particularly, this movie started to make itself on the while we were shooting it, in a different way as we imagined it. And here I would look back to what Julio was saying, because we were on our way every day on our way to location, and back from location after shooting, we were on the phone with Julio about what he had seen in the last day's dailies, and would bounce around ideas. And I think so a good example for that is the first 2 days. Like almost, I think everything we shot on the first 2 days we threw out, right, Julio? I'm not sure about like every shot, but like a lot of it. And
whatever was whatever was the opening scene, essentially, took a couple shots at it. I'd say I
Yeah.
think it was the third time was the charm,
Because
right?
we were trying to for the first day we were trying something we came up with through those weeks and days we were prepping for it, and it wasn't totally working. We were not totally satisfied with it, so we took another approach the second day, which was just the opposite, but we went a little maybe too far with it, or that didn't click. And I think slowly, I think when this long shot from the outside of the living room, I think Sam figured that we should, that's the actually the scene that we shot like 3 times, I think. And we ended up using that long shot, which was, we just set up that shot connecting the bathroom and the living room. And then Sam said that, okay, why not try this whole scene in that one setup? And actually it worked. And I think that's when we started to feel that, okay, let's leave this movie, make it sell, like let's get on this ride and be more flexible. And that sometimes being there with the actors, really close emotion. I'm talking especially visually, like being there in their argument in the middle of it, very close to them. Sometimes taking like a more objective look at um, uh, taking a more objective look at these two people, like go a little, take 3 steps back, look at them for a couple of seconds in a wide shot, and just, I don't know. So that kind of approach, and I think it was a balance between those moments and the very engaged arguing that created a certain style and started to drive our decisions.
Mm.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm curious if you guys can walk us through a little bit about the compromises you had to make in terms of the size of the team, because you've got to be in a bubble, particularly the people on set. And if I think I read that the production designer, for very specific reasons, could not be part of the bubble, but the set decorator could, or something of that nature. And you've got people, someone like the production designer has to potentially be going out and getting things for the set. So I'm curious how you pared things down. And a lot of people were probably doing more than they normally would on a production. So what did you have to accommodate, pick up, stack on top of your work as it already was?
Yeah, I mean, it was a small crew. We had to strip it down as much as we could. It was a skeleton crew, no first AD, I mean, no ADs at all, no assistant directors at all, no, no script supervisor, as you said it. And I had my camera team was my first AC on the loader, my second AC / loader. We ended up having one grip with us. We had 2 initially, but our key grip and the grip, but he unfortunately something happened to his back and he had to leave. And I had I think we had 4 electricians and a gaffer, or 3 electricians and a gaffer, and it was Zendaya doing his own hair and makeup. It was it was a tiny crew. I would say it was like a film school project size of crew. And I think the last time I shot with this kind of crew was in film school, and it felt great, by the way. I mean, sometimes it was painful to move equipment that way, but producers were carrying boxes. I was laying dolly tracks out, so it was back to film school, and it felt good. Sometimes it was painful. So, and of course, we moved a little slower than usually, but at the same time, we had the advantage of being in one space. You don't have to there are no company moves, so you get to spend your time on the actual filming, which is great.
It seems like having no ADs on a film is sort of a recipe for disaster. How did you guys get around that?
Yeah, don't try it at home. It's not something I recommend to anyone, but we had to. I mean, we had to do it ourselves, and producers were kind of taking over the roles of what ADs would do on set, but it was, it worked because it was a very tiny set with no, like, 2 actors and whatever. But I don't think that Sam wants to do it again.
So Julio, what about for you in terms of the size of the post-production team? Were there certain things that you had to compromise on in terms of who you could hire and how you were going to work? I mean, I'm sure that normally Sam would have been with you in the edit. I'm not sure how that changes. I know editors, friends who are editors who have brought their studios into their homes. And that obviously means that you can't really just have people pop by.
Yeah. So being an editor, compromise is my middle name. I don't mean, I mean, I definitely have some strong principles, but I know who's the boss, not Tony Danza, but, and I sort of, I'm used to adapting and being flexible to different environments, especially being an editor, coming up from like being like flat, like truly independent filmmaking, like shoestring budgets, just like there's always been scenarios. I mean, this was basically like it was for Marcell to go back to his student film days. This reminded me of my early hard scrabble indie days, because it was the second or third film that I've edited in a dining room. So that was fun. We just had a kit, sort of the size of the overall post-production team, I'm not fully aware from after, offline, but for our purposes, it was myself and my assistant editor, Nicola Boyanov, who basically, I mean, just did a fantastic job. He would, I think it was a team viewer we used, some sort of remote process. I had a rig set up in my dining room. He would pop in remotely, so he'd get footage from a hard drive from the lab, and then he'd process it, organize it, and then we shared a project over some sort of interwebs mechanism, and so the projects would update accordingly, so we wouldn't be able to work at the same time in specific areas of our projects like we can on a bigger show where you have shared storage and everybody can pop in everywhere and it's not going to tax the system. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, I did it from my dining room almost entirely, and then I would send cuts to Sam, and it was tricky because, no joke, my favorite part of the process is being in the room with the director or the showrunner, and that's where it's like a sweet spot for me, that dialogue between the two, and sort of creating the synthesis of these ideas that turns into eventually, through the notes process, turns into your final artifact or product or whatever you want to call it, film, show, episode. I love that, and having that sort of taken away was a little melancholy. I shed a tear or two here and there, but I think I think a credit to their incredible design, and their premeditation of how they're going to shoot things. Also, the amount of experience with a director that you can have on cutting a feature is a pretty amazing, but nothing like an 8-episode series that's just ambitious. And I got to know Sam as an artist real quick. Like you had to adapt to it very quickly. And I also try to have a sort of sympathy, if not empathy, more of a it depends on what with the process from like what the producers do to what Marcell's doing with Sam, and just I try to have at least little bits of information so that I can kind of like attack material through another person's eyes in a way. There's definitely a part of me, but there's also wanting to capture the director's vision. Like, I'm not gonna sit there and say like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna try my best to make this along the lines of a Jerry Lewis picture. You know, why not? Like, and then clearly, like, if certain choices would have been made at that point if I'm doing a broader comedy, that if you present, you know, I might have had a grand old time doing that, but then you present it to a director and they're just like mortified and shocked, and you're like, well, let's start over. And like, okay, fine. So you sort of have to have like this unspoken sort of short, it's a little bit of a shorthand when you do speak, and then also this sort of almost like being in a quartet or something, if I'm going to be pretentious about it, and you start jamming with a quartet, you do it for a while, and you know, you're like, I'm the upright bass and Sam's the sax, and I start to learn cues, and I feel like I develop that sort of sympathetic connection, and I try to utilize that. And I guess because of that experience on that full season, you know, things were really quite smooth as far as like sending Sam cuts and him being like, oh dang, I really like it. And I'd be like so nervous. I'd kick out a cut, or Nick would. He'd kick him out, he'd export and kick him out a cut. And Sam, you know, I'd be waiting until like I'd get a call like at 11:30 midnight, and Sam's like, that's pretty darn good. And I'm like, yes, all right, sweet. And like, you know, he's like, you never know. You never truly know. You might have an inclination that you've nailed something, and then somebody like just tears it down, and you're like, okay, let's do it again. But anyhow, so kicking out the cuts, and you know, getting some positive feedback, and then notes from Sam, and like, hey, what about this take? What do you think about this one? And then I dig in, and you know, and then at one point he gave me like 3 pages of notes, and he's like, look, do the notes that you think are worth it and ignore the ones you don't. And like, that's worse for me, because I'm like, oh man, I don't want to make these choices but then it was actually pretty liberating. There were ones where I'm like, I don't know, I don't think that's going to happen. But just going through it, and I tackled Sam's notes broadly in that sense. And then it was kind of, I think, a product of many things, but I feel very, very fortunate that it came together pretty smoothly in the grand scheme of how editorial can go on projects. Yeah, because, you know, half the time it's a nightmare. So.
I mean, the first version I saw was pretty close to a movie, you know, which is like very rare that and that I have that experience on Euphoria as well. We're from Julio, we're getting back like first assemblies that are like pretty much look like a episode of TV, which is not the case in most projects, to be honest. It's and you know, it's a lot of factors, but probably they are on pretty much in the same frequency.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's very nice of you, Marcell. If there weren't a pandemic, I'd hug you, but you know, what do you do?
I wanted to ask a question, and if this is totally off base, we can move on. But I'd read that there was an interesting structure here in terms of having the department heads have a stake in the profit of the film, and we saw. Early, I mean, it was announced I forget exactly when, because every day is now, you know, sort of the same day, it feels like. But at some point, the film was picked up by Netflix, and it was like a big deal. And so I'm curious to talk a little bit about what that meant for you guys to like maybe have a bit more of an ownership stake in the movie. And then also, I read that there was a certain amount of proceeds that went towards a food bank, which is amazing. So all of that, you know, with a film that's you know, relatively inexpensive to make by Hollywood standards, lands a great deal with this you know, massive distributor. It was #1 on Netflix. So I mean, all of that is really interesting as we move forward, thinking about like the scale of movies and the profitability of movies, and how individuals are compensated for making movies. So I was just curious if you guys could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think so. I don't know the ins and outs of every detail about it, but yes, department heads did I guess have points, and it's interesting because I've had points on several things, and points usually lead, in independent film, they kind of, it's basically a fun discussion to say like, yeah, I had points and I got nothing, so great. It was refreshing because the way they built it, it was, I forgot the legalese and the terminology for it, but it basically, there wasn't a lot of obstacles in the way for the team, the core of the team to see some money out of it. And I'm grateful, because deeply grateful, because Sam did basically, like, he's got this iconoclastic sort of like, I don't care if it's been done this way before, because he could have very easily set it up like every other independent film. And it's sort of, I don't know, like, how much I can. So basically, the way they usually finance things is like, everybody who put money in is getting money right back right away before the film's even done. And there's a lot of gray areas in the accounting and all this stuff that can be questionable according to what who you're dealing with. And in this way, Sam simplified that, and instead of doing what's usually done on many independent films, it was structured differently, and it allowed for people who put in a lot of work to get compensation for it, which I'm deeply, deeply grateful for.
Yeah, and not just us. It comes down to camera team, key grip, gaffer, whatever. So it's not just DP, editor, whatever. It really comes down to the whole crew.
And I think, and with the food bank thing, I don't want to misquote, but I do think I think Ash had mentioned it was a significant number of families that got fed. It was impressive. Like, it was.
Yeah, it was going through Feed America, I think, and it was a big amount of,
like, a
donation.
Million, like a
I don't know
like
the exact number.
a million meals or something like that. It was, that's humbling, and it's nice to put some effort in, and to, like, actually, for that effort to make an impact that isn't just cultural in the entertainment sense, but it goes a little bit further, and that's really cool.
I want to take some questions that we have coming in, but I thought, Marcel, it would be really instructive to hear about, like, your typical day in the middle of production, just so that people who are potentially working on projects, obviously on a much smaller scale, kind of understand the way that a day can be divided, so that you're getting everything you need to, but also following protocols.
Oh, you mean like a shooting day?
Yeah.
It really depends on the project, and I've been working for like in couple of projects since the pandemic started, and it really comes down to production companies and the exact project. For example, on Malcolm and Marie, it was a more simpler project because it was us quarantined together. It was no in and no one was going in and out. It was a pretty safe environment. We still had to wear masks and stuff, but we didn't get tested every day. So we got tested when we got there. We got tested before we started working, but it wasn't like a continuous threat. It was since the pandemic started, I never felt safer than on that shoot, because it was totally isolated from everything. on other projects, for example, now we're working on Euphoria, we're prepping it. It's like every other day you have to get tested. You wear a mask. You're not supposed to be in a room with more than whatsoever people, and so on. It's a constant. It's constantly present. On Malcolm and Marie, then yeah, for wearing masks, everything was kind of back to normal in a way. And of course we had a smaller crew and whatever, but once we were there, we got to do our jobs the way we were doing it before. On some projects, and of course there are tiny projects where I was working in Europe and countries. I was working, it's everywhere, it's different, and somewhere they take it very seriously, somewhere they don't take it that seriously, and it's there's some more chance to get sick, or just you get nervous or you don't get nervous, I don't know, but it's different. And but I don't think it slows us down that much as I was expecting that it will by the end of the day.
And are you finding that the commitment from everyone on the team is pretty uniform? We've seen some.
I would say probably hair and makeup, like department, is not easy, because they are they have to touch people and whatever. That's like, it's not easy for them. It's probably a totally different way of working for them. But for me, I'm not approaching something differently because I wear a mask, or I have to, I don't know. My job is still my job at the end of the day. It's more about, I think it's more of a hit for production, like financially, because for example, on Malcolm and Marie, I think the biggest part of the project was like actually making it happen in the middle of COVID, and taking all those safety measurements and tests and quarantining the way, and that was the biggest budgetary, like that was the biggest number in the budget.
I'm seeing a question down here from Evan. If you think that remote editing will permanently change the editing industry post-COVID?
Marcel, you want to answer that? I think that's a great that's a great question. I think look, moments like this, massive national and global crisis, there's going to be a shift in a lot of things culturally. Now, with respect to remote editing, I think people are going to be way more comfortable with it. You're going to see more of it stick, in the sense that if a production company sees a way to save money, that they might, hint at maybe, what do you think about doing it from home? I had already been doing it on, I'll date myself a little bit, but on like Final Cut Pro 7 and some software versions of Avid, I had done some, like I said, I'd worked from dining rooms before, but that was a kind of fiscal necessity that I'm thankful to hopefully be past for a little while. But yes, I do think that you'll see it more commonly. There will be continuing technologies that allow it to be done more easily and more cheaply. There are some fundamentals that I think it's going to depend on the director or the showrunner you're working with, because some of them are just, they just take off. I've heard about this. I have not worked with people like this, but they take off for a while and then they get cuts sent to them, and they're not a constant presence in the editing room. But I tend to work with very active and involved directors and showrunners. So with them, and the fact that I love that process, I'm going to try to minimize my remote editing, simply because even though I love not sitting in traffic and almost, getting fender benders almost every other day, I love not dealing with LA traffic, but to me, it's worth the sacrifice in order to have a more active engagement, a personal engagement. And then, for instance, the show, I'm curious, I don't even know what season 2 is exactly going to look like from an infrastructural / like where we're going to edit, how many editors, and whether we're really close to each other or not. I know that season one we had, from my experiences in like documentary work where I really enjoyed working in editorial teams, I wanted to create a kind of synthesis between your, to filmic or cinematic television production style, editorial style, with the collective editorial styles that I've had experience with. And it worked out. I mean, look, not every day was perfect, but it worked out quite well. And that was a pretty intense, like, interpersonal experience, like hopping into an editing bay with an editor and developing that sort of collegial, like somewhere between a colleague and a friend, and developing that relationship to where you could openly throw around ideas. And that's not something that can happen if everybody's in their own dining room or office, at their homes. So I guess in summation, I think absolutely it will be, there will be a shift in more remote editing. I do think more people will do it. I don't see it being the once the vaccines really, once we have COVID on the run and at least minimized through vaccinations and whatnot, I see a drift towards prior models, but I don't think it will go all the way back to what it was before. So it'll be a bit of a hybrid scenario that I think I'm interested to see what it's going to look like. We'll find out.
We have a question from Linda that's asking if there's one person on set who takes responsibility for managing the COVID protocols, or does it fall to multiple people to monitor and enforce the protocols? And I'm also curious to know a little bit about the comparison of what you guys did on the film back before the industry had sort of settled on some specific standards, and how that has now evolved into whatever might be happening on set now.
Oh yeah. So on the movie, yeah, we had Katya Washington, John David Washington's sister, who was a producer on the show, and she of course, consulting with doctors, she created all the protocols we were following, and several people were helping her, and obviously things that like testing and stuff like that involves like professionals, they were done by those things were done by professionals. On Euphoria, we have like a whole team of people just in the COVID. It's a whole department now. It's a whole thing. It's multiple people on and offset and in the office, and it's a lot of things. It's a big logistical task to tackle.
Do you think even after, the vaccination is widespread, and it seems like, we can work without masks on, without, having to quarantine, do you see changes that reflect the way in which we protect ourselves from germs and viruses happening years from now, once we're through this particular widespread disease?
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I really don't know, but it looks like, just from a very practical standpoint, what I've witnessed in the film and like in the United States, when there's a business rising in something, it never goes away. So I think they will find a way to make money of this thing once we're past the COVID. That's my feeling. Hope, I don't know. On the side, it's a lot of it gives people jobs, which is great, but I don't know. It's we will see. And yeah, I didn't want it to be sarcastic or anything. It's a very important job they're doing right now. I'm just saying that practically what I see is that once there is a whole infrastructure built on something, they will try to use it for something else once the problem is gone. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that we try to avoid germs, I think.
Yeah, maybe people will actually stay home from work when they have the flu or something like that. Maybe there'll be a little bit more of a conscientious approach, but I think, hope, I don't think people are going to be wearing masks when they don't have to, that's getting the prints across your face. And yeah.
But maybe you will when you're traveling, who knows?
Yeah, maybe I might. Yeah, 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 absolutely. I think those planes that's not a good spot to be in. Yeah.
Raquel is asking about the choice to shoot in black and white.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's something people frequently ask, and I don't have like a very great answer to this, but there are parts of my job that it's not like all conscious decisions, and you have to there are a lot of instinct in what we are doing, and I guess the same applies to an editor, I guess. But correct me, Julio, if I'm wrong.
I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. So
yeah, so it's we rely a lot on our instincts. But I remember the first time Sam called me and read me the first couple of pages of the script, and we started to talk about white immediately, and it was something that was coming from our guts. And I can talk about a lot of things, and I can explain a lot of things, and I can make it look it was a very conscious decision. And also the references we had were from the 60s and from a certain kind of cinema that's obviously was black and white. And I mean, not obviously, but was black, and those are all black and white references. We wanted to create a certain homage to this, this 60s, I mean, movies like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and that 60s Hollywood. And yeah, I can talk about a lot of things like that, but at the end of the day, really an instinctive decision.
Is there anything that you guys take away from the Malcolm and Marie production that you're going to bring to the second season of Euphoria?
I don't know. Julio?
I mean, it's interesting because in a way, we already did, editorially speaking, with that sort of, how I described that two-hander dialogue intensive sort of scenario. It ended up carrying over into the two special episodes of Euphoria, the Trouble Don't Last Always, the Rue episode and the Jules episode. Both, for all intents and purposes, are mostly two-handers as well. There's, a slight elaboration on that for the Jules, and then of course they were in a diner with some extras for the Rue one. But so that was applied there, but I don't see that sort of extended concentration and analysis of long dialogue scenes. That's not happening on season 2. Season 2 is gonna be a little bit more of a true to Euphoria form, a little bit wilder, and a little bit more of the visual montage style, montage aesthetic is gonna definitely gonna have a place again. I imagine that with Malcolm and Marie, there isn't anytime you work on anything, to me there isn't, you can't help but bring some of that with you to the next projects. You learn a little something, and usually it's a mistake you learn because it's a painful response to your making a mistake, so you try to do better the next time. So outside of that, I think everything builds. It always builds into the next project. But for me, it's not going to be a terribly overt thing. It'll yeah, subtle things here and there.
Yeah.
Same
here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just have time for a couple more, but the next question is from Linda. Do you think that crews might prefer the idea of statewide film production protocols for COVID being established, or instead of having each production devising their own, is this feasible? And I guess I should add, has that happened?
Oh yeah, we should ask the COVID people. I know that every studio has its own protocols, but probably it's based on something that's mandatory nationwide or statewide, or I don't know. To be honest, I don't know the legal part of this. I know that we are following the Warner Media protocols.
I think that from what I've gathered, and forgive my ignorance, and if I say this, misstate this, but from what I seem to understand is that there's still an ongoing negotiations between the unions, with probably my guess is like the Producers Guild and like maybe the studios as well. That there's ongoing discussions and negotiations to sort of come up with the industry-wide, more specific template. There have been, for instance, the Editors Guild has sent out various emails with best practices and things to do and not do, and to contact them if something seems awry in the COVID sense. For me, I thought for my part, the Warner Brothers protocols seemed like I felt safe, like I felt comfortable with the way they were handling it, to the point where we actually, for the Euphoria special episodes, we were also on the lot, the United Artists Warner Hollywood lot, and we thankfully, I'm going to knock on synthetic wood, that we had no instances of COVID and no outbreaks in editorial for the, I think, several months, 4 or 5 months that we were cutting. So I think obviously standardization and uniformity and a sort of a unified response to this, I think, would be a very good idea. Not necessarily just for the state, but for the industry across the US. To me, it makes sense. But I think by the time it actually, if that hasn't occurred already, by the time they do, hopefully we're all vaccinated anyway. So I don't know. For future, no. I mean, hopefully there's hopefully there's not another one anytime soon. So pandemic. But boy. Anyway, don't underfund the CDC and get rid of your pandemic response team. That's something we could do too, as governmentally, as Americans.
Okay, one last one. This is also about changes moving forward. I know that, so this is from Evan. I know there are a lot of talks about bringing more women and people of color into the writer-director roles. We don't hear as much about cinematography and editing. Are there initiatives in the industry right now to promote diversity and inclusion? And I'm just curious if you guys, are hearing things from the guilds about, various initiatives and how those are helping to sort of change the traditional makeup of who gets those jobs.
I know that there are programs in the AHC. I'm sure about that, and also we have now an internship program on Euphoria through HBO and through NGOs. That's all. We have a camera PA position, a paid intern position that I was just interviewing people for that job. That's like people who have like less access to this industry, and yeah, I really hope there will be like significant changes in this. But yeah, this is the two things I know of for sure.
Yeah, on our part, it's absolutely, this is it's a big discussion, and a big, it's a big thing to think about and discuss and deal with in the editorial. I'm very honored to have been earlier in the year or last year inducted into ACE, American Cinema Editors, and I'm a mentor in the diversity mentorship program through ACE, and it's I mean, I can't tell you how much I love the group and everybody involved. So their whole mission was the whole mission is to take people who are underrepresented and create this mentorship group where folks who have more experience and who are actually in ACE talk to folks at any level, but usually assistant editors and editors who are hoping to one day be an ACE, and so its primary mission is to not only have that day-to-day mentor interaction, like advice and and sort of like how to get through like the bad days in editing, and how to do any number of things that are editorially related. But what they're hoping to do is to shepherd more people of color and women into ACE, so that the organization, which is traditionally very, very white, is, you know, starting to get a little some different hues and shades, but and it all also, yeah, it's really a great program. So that's from my specific experience, in that I know that also the Guild has a Latin steering committee and an African American steering committee, where the Guild discusses, you know, obviously they create events and discussions. There's a panel that I was a part of last year that dealt with you know, sort of the representation of Latin peoples and Latinx folks in Hollywood, and the movies that we sort of see ourselves in, and the ones that we kind of revile, like as far as how Hollywood has handled it. So it's a big discussion, and a imperative one, a necessary one in editorial. So I'm excited for the changes ahead. You know, I think there's some really there's finally some real momentum. Too long in coming, but it's happening, and hopefully picks up pace.
And just so that people know, is there a place we can steer them towards in terms of finding access to these programs?
Sorry,
you go.
sorry.
Go for it.
I just know that I was spending some time with this because we just had our interviews. So HBO is doing this through different NGOs. So you can't really apply to HBO. You have to apply to one of these, and just actually you have to be a member of the programs of one of those NGOs, and they suggest candidates for the job. So because I get a lot of emails, and I get a lot of people are reaching out who want to shadow, to be an intern, or just work on Euphoria, and I was like hoping that now I can tell them that, okay, here you can apply, but it's not that easy. And I think there's a reason for that. So I think it's great that it's not me who's deciding who are the candidates, but there is like a real filter to like people who actually so who independent NGOs are deciding who can apply to this. But to be honest, I couldn't find out at all where to apply.
So in our part, it also has a little bit of a let's say cryptic quality, in the sense that there isn't a lot of information. I would encourage people to, for instance, you know, don't be afraid to email people in the business. Some of the people to reach out to me, like to me and to other editors, just from an editorial sense. I don't want to speak for cinematographers, so but for instance, I love getting emails from people who are interested in learning more about editing, and about, you know, different channels of getting there. I think I've seen some friends of mine have an enormous amount of success, not only because they're prodigiously talented. So it's when that talent sort of lined up with a very, very active like courage in emailing people and setting and going to, like, you know, once we're allowed to, like, you know, having coffee with people and asking them questions. I'd say, you know, there's Zoom coffee now. Someone just emailed me from the mentor group saying, hey, can we have a Zoom coffee? And I'm going to answer back, absolutely, let's do it, let's talk. So I think even though there's these formal mechanisms that exist, the informal process of emailing people, asking about them, and not worrying about if someone doesn't email you back, say, all right, fine, that person's not right for me. So reaching out to people, I think that goes a long way, a really long way. And then I think for instance, like the Latin steering committee and the guild, I mean, I think you can, I'm not sure, you could check out the, I'm sorry that I personally don't even know. I know some of the folks in it, but I don't know how to reach them specifically. But I think you could go to the Motion Picture Editors Guild website, and you could probably find, you know, several folks you can email that are a little bit more on the informational side of things that to help answer people's questions. And you can ask them, if you don't see something specific for the Latin steering committee, you can email someone and say, hello, I'm very interested in being a part of the Latin steering committee or a BIPOC group or whatnot, LGBTQ plus group. You could hit them up, find out who might be running that group or influential in that group, and shoot them an email. And you know, you'll find that a lot of people, successful or not, they'll reach out to you, especially editors. We're a humble bunch.
By the way, I just looked it up, and our internship, so the candidates for our internship program was coming through this organization called NOVAC, NOVAC. I think it's a New Orleans-based organization, but they have a California branch as well, and yeah, they have a lot of programs. I'm just looking at the website right now, but so that's where you have to be in a program to be able to apply to HBO internships. Or this is at least one of the NGOs.
Well, thank you guys so much for spending the afternoon with us. Congratulations on the film. Looking forward to Euphoria season 2 and everything else you guys are working on. Marcell, köszönöm szépen.
Oh, köszönöm. Én köszönöm. Thank you for having
awesome.
me. Look at that, Julio.
Is that Magyar?
We can continue, right? In Hungarian.
All right, that's amazing. Well, yo puedo hablar en español, vamos otro lenguaje, idioma por aquí. But anyway, yeah, that's great.
Io ti posso parlare in italiano.
Ah, io parlo poco italiano e io sono americano. Va bene.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having
us so
us.
much. It's been an honor. Really appreciate you having us. This has been awesome. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Take care. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.